Really pleased to be here. Thanks. It's great to feel like there really is not just a water community here in California, but a water family. That we might not all know each other, but increasingly I really feel that there's a common set of objectives, a common tool set that we're discovering together about how to unlock a whole nother set of outcomes. Realizing that the past binaries aren't necessarily true, that we can find ways supported by rigorous science, supported by refreshing and politically potent coalitions to create a new solution set. And in that way, this talk is going to be a little window into some of those epiphanies from an ecological perspective. I'm asking you guys to, take off your boots and come out barefoot into the puddles, because that's what this is really about. We're gonna talk about the power of puddles for a little while. And believe me, I'm as surprised as anyone else when to hear these words coming out of my mouth, that puddles have incredible power. What do I mean? Well, let's take a little journey. Let's figure it out, right? So here we are in Sacramento. And the Sac Valley, as we know today, is one of the great mosaics of agricultural production, right? The Central Valley as a whole, not just a bread basket, but the fruit and nut basket, this incredible, intensely farmed landscape with vibrant agricultural rural communities, right? But once that same landscape was a mosaic of wetlands. Really, the Central Valley can be thought of as a bathtub, as this incredible dynamic landscape that was represented and really is defined by its wetlands, right? And they were not always in the same place every year. There were different kinds, whether it's emergent marsh, whether you're talking about flood basins of tules that were 14 feet tall and literally, 100,000 acres. Trying to imagine what it would be like to go through a landscape like that, where Fremont, with his men crossing the little valley where 580 goes now, right, out past like Livermore, right? That was all tules. And they got lost out there, and they standing on the saddles of their horses, now where it's all auto dealerships and new condos, standing on the saddle of their horses, they couldn't even see the top of what is now called Fremont Peak, just right there. That's a little valley. You start to think about the size of these wetlands that were right here in Yolo across the river in Sutter. This was an incredible, dynamic, wet landscape, right? The very names of the valley counties, right? Before they were counties, they were flood basins. Colusa, Sacramento, Yolo, right? These actually define the Sacramento itself. And what's a flood basin? A flood basin were these low-lying, shallow areas adjacent to the river that every spring, every winter, as the rivers swole with either rain or snow melt, the water would spill over those natural levees and fill these ephemeral lakes. Sometimes they weren't so ephemeral. Sometimes the valley was water from Red Bluff to Fresno, from the foothills to the foothills, an inland sea, right? But generally, it was a wet place. And the development of this place can really get summed up with a single word. It's not reclamation, a word I've always had problems with. I don't know what, I think that we're doing the reclaiming now. But drainage, where water used to spread and slow, it now, whether it's on the roof of this building or the impermeable street outside or any orchard or any farm field, parking lot at Safeway, the bypass itself, right? All engineered to drain as rapidly as possible. That is where we're starting to get into this idea of what is a puddle? What place does the puddle have on the landscape and as part of this incredible system? So ubiquitous drainage, right? We've lost 95% of our wetlands, and this incredible assemblage of fish that were adapted here in California, 129 different kinds, adapted to the patterns of water flowing across this diverse landscape. They have felt that alteration, right? Over 3/4 of those fish species are now on a pretty sharp trajectory towards extinction. That's much greater impact than a cursory look at the California Endangered Species Act or the Endangered Species Act would actually give you. But when you dig in, you see that there's a universal theme. Our native critters can no longer recognize the river systems that they evolved in, that they're adapted to. Their keys, honed by eons of natural selection and evolution, no longer fit the landscape's locks. We can do something about that. So out of what is a very bleak conservation assessment, the first of its kind, comes a real hope. A hope that if we can pivot towards process, if we can start to understand the underlying causes of environmental degradation, of aquatic ecosystem collapse, we have a chance of actually remedying them. And we're in the valley. Let's talk about Chinook, right? This was once the most diverse run of Chinook, still is the most diverse run of Chinook salmon on Earth. 4 distinct different runs of fish. Fish named for the season in which they come out of the salt and into fresh water, right? But all of those, save one, are facing extinction. That other, the fall run, is what the entire commercial fishery is dependent on, but it is in turn dependent on hatcheries. So we have a large effect of that landscape scale alteration on these iconic fish that have an outsized effect on California's economy, in that water passed from where it's more abundant in the north to where it's needed in the south is really the fuel of the 5th largest economy on Earth. And one of the chief impediments to moving that water around is the now ubiquitous ecosystem collapse, epitomized by this plight of fish, of Chinook. So a little story. I'm probably rambling on. What am I doing on time? Do you know?
5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes, great. So my really good friend and colleague, Carson Jeffries, did his master's with Peter Moyle down on the Cosumnes River, the last undammed river system to drain into the Delta. And he found a really remarkable thing there, which was that in one of the last remnants of floodplain left in the valley, when compared to the river channel on the left, he caged fish in both of those environments and came up with a very iconic picture, one that all of you have seen before, but one that is worth repeating because it's a window into not the past, but our future. This is what a Sacramento salmon should look like as a juvenile. And it looks like that because it's been exposed to a functioning aquatic environment, a floodplain that actually has the capacity to cycle energy from the sun into plant matter, into a microbial food web, into bugs, into fish, birds up there. A very simple food web, but one that's really important and one that happens ultimately in puddles, in wetlands. And so the work that I've been in the midst of for the last about decade or so was to look at how that same food web might be managed, might be mimicked on this intensely farmed agricultural wetland that now represents the Central Valley. Yes, we want to restore anywhere we can functioning small natural habitats, but we must recognize that here in the Central Valley and really globally, the human footprint and human management is ubiquitous, and that if we don't find ways to welcome the wild back into the matrix, if we don't find ways to make our working agricultural rangeland, timberlands more beneficial to native species, that we don't have the tools to succeed as conservationists. This is a necessary expansion. And so initially, what did we do? We went into the YOLO bypass on Nags Ranch, just across the river from here, flooded rice fields after harvest, to mimic that natural floodplain process, right? And the fish grew exceptionally. I mean, we were essentially asking people to give us Chinook to put them in a mud puddle. You can imagine that the reception was a little chilly. These pictures helped a lot. But I think this next experiment, which we did in the winter of 2016, really encapsulates the story, right? So we took the same idea of floating pens. In the lower left there, you see a plastic mesh 2 by 2 by 4 foot pen, in each of which is 10 tagged fish, electronically tagged juvenile salmon. The same setup was put just on the other side of the levee in Tule Canal, and then just on the other side of Tule Canal in the flooded rice fields out on Nags Ranch. And the picture you might come to expect at this point, those on the floodplain turned into what we call floodplain fatties, growing much, much quicker than those in the river. But why is critical. So 700% greater growth in just 3 weeks. That's phenomenal and has an incredible impact on the rest of that fish's life. But why that is super important. So on the right, you have a beaker of water representing the density of invertebrate life in the Sacramento River. The middle is the canal, which was 600 times more bug biomass than the Sac River. That seemed like amazing, right? But then you have the floodplain, 150 times more. That's 15,000% greater access to energy, to food, to the basis of life, to biomass. That's a fundamentally different system. And we have been denying our fish that food resource with our levees and canals and diversion. We separate the river channel where the fish are from the floodplain where the food is made. One of the fundamental reasons that water on the floodplain makes that food is the residence time of water. In blue, you see the Sac River, the water's turning over in that location where the cage is every couple seconds. It's about a half a minute in the canal, but on the floodplain, it's several days. Historically, I was talking about those, this mosaic of wetlands. It would have been months of inundation. What does that mean? That means that is the time needed for sunlight stored as plant matter, right? That's what plants are. They're batteries. They're storing that solar energy. You need that time of breaking that detritus down so that microbes can turn it into bugs, and bugs can then be turned into biomass. That's the fuel, the engine of productivity that once allowed the Sacramento Valley or the Central Valley to have 2 million Chinook. Also, equally important, of course, is the fact that algae floating in that water is harvesting winter sunlight and turning that also into food. So you have two different mechanisms, breaking down summer sunlight stored as plant matter and capturing winter sunlight with algae. But the key here is that in a river, there's very little surface area caught between two rip-rapped steep banks to harvest that sunlight. The moment that water spreads and slows, you have a physical environment that's really able to harvest that energy, right? And so we're talking about, it's not rocket science, but it is physics, right? We're talking about energy and biomass. With cutting off over 95% of our wetlands, we've substantially reduced the energy that flows into our aquatic ecosystem. With 5% of our wetlands, it should come as no surprise. With 5% of the energy that we have 5% of our endangered fish stocks. That is the system we built, it's a system we designed, and we have the capacity to improve it, right? So sunlight makes sugar, right? Sugar is broken down by microbes to make bugs, bugs make fish. Floodplains are essentially the solar cells for that aquatic experiment. Both summer and winter's solar energy is captured out there on that floodplain surface. And without it, we're running out of energy, right? So critically, though, it doesn't happen instantaneously. It takes time, right? Making fish takes time. And that is absolutely critical for many of you that are working in floodplain restoration now. Because the current crop of design plans that we tend to be working with are about getting floodplains wet and much less about keeping them wet. And the benefit really happens as a function of time, of inundation. So frequency and inundation duration are absolutely key. And this is just a good way to, might you be able to press play on that? It'd be down in the bottom left. We can just go out on this one. Because this is the making of a floodplain fatty. If you take a picture of a fish on a daily basis in one of these pools, this is what happens. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it does take time. And so this general idea that residence time needs to be incorporated into the way we manage water. That, rivers, I think up until this point, there's been a general understanding that, salmon belonged in the river and the river belonged in its banks. Neither of those things is true, and a central tenet to that is that where possible, increasing the residence time, the flow time of water across the landscape is a good thing. And that will apply on valley floor floodplains, it'll apply in mountain meadows, it'll apply in estuarine environments, that we really have to think about bringing duration into our calculations. So I think I'm out of time. Thank you.
Do we have any questions?
None. Awesome.
Is your research in lakes at all? Are you doing
Can you repeat the question?
The question was, are we working in lakes? And the answer is no, that we aren't specifically. What's really important to note, though, is if you study lakes, right, limnology, often called the queen of sciences, I think you'll open up your limnology textbook, as Charles Goldman at UC Davis always put it out in front, and the first chapter is going to talk about how residence time is the basis of productivity in what I'm talking about is not scientific breakthroughs. It's just the fact that we haven't been thinking about it in the context of river management, and the interface between water and landscape. So, yeah, we're not working in lakes right now, but the same ideas do hold in those environments.
Hang on. Microphone, sorry.
Hello. So the smolt out migration period, is it different for smolts in the floodplain versus the river and canal? Meaning, like, do they both migrate out at the same time, or is there a delay for the fish on the floodplain and out migrating to the ocean?
Do we need to repeat that? No, not now. Okay. So timing is an incredibly important aspect of diversity, but really what we're looking for is a diverse landscape that then can support diverse life histories, diverse behaviors of these fish. That includes the timing. What having floodplain habitat up in the upper basin, in the Sutter, in the Yolo, what that means is as fish are out migrating out, they're taking more time in different locations, and they're expanding that portfolio of out-migration timing. That's the basis of resiliency. What we have right now is a system where, for the most part, the out-migration is hatchery influenced. And when we open our hatchery doors, when we let those hatchery fish go, if we hit the jackpot, if it's a big water year, if the wind's blowing out in the Gulf of the Farallones and there's upwelling and a lot of food there, you can get a really big return. If not, you get very little. What we're looking for is a more resilient system where you have more diversity of timing, you have more diversity of life history, you have fish in different places in the landscape taking advantage of different patterns. And so what we see the floodplain as is, it doesn't matter if you're a hatchery fish or a wild fish. When that fish has access to the food webs and has enough time to take advantage and to acclimate that, what we're doing is making sure that all our eggs don't end up in one basket, that we're broadening that portfolio. Right now, out-migration timings are, I think, far too narrow. and that one of the most important ways to broaden them is to broaden the physical conditions in the valley.
Thanks, Jake. Great talk. Really inspiring. I'd have heard of this ancient, wetlands, and you explained it so simply and well. It was the clearest presentation I've seen on it. Is there a co-benefit possibility, or is this what I'm saying could be a totally dumb idea, but around groundwater recharge and flooding, fallowing agriculture, flooding that landscape, and allowing it to be a place where the ecosystem could recover and also recharge the aquifer?
Yeah, a fantastic question, and you're really putting, I think, your finger on one of the great potential, which is multiple benefits, which is realizing that we don't have the luxury any longer to manage a system for a single species or a single constituency, that we can't pit flood protection against ecological function against water delivery. And it just so happens that the floodplain is the nexus for that, because not only can those floodplains be the places where you suggest that when water slows down and spreads out, it also sinks in. But the same time we have this ecological process I was talking about, and we're relieving the flood pressure on the system. So our bypasses exist as pressure release valves to make sure that when the water is coming up within the river system, right down on I Street, right? When you're looking up 17 feet at a cresting river, you want to make sure that the water goes over Fremont Weir and into Yolo bypass so that the majority of water is bypassed around the city of Sacramento. So flood protection, water security, water, floodplain recharge in places where the underlying aquifer and soil types permit it. Ecological function, agricultural sustainability, all of those things come into contact, overlap in a suite of multiple benefits on the floodplain. I was talking about puddles. The other thing, we hear levees all the time. What's a levee? It's a pile of dirt, right? It's a pile of dirt next to a stream, a ditch. Those piles of dirt interact maybe 4 of the primary challenges facing humanity, right? Ecosystem function, like I was just talking about. Flood protection in a time of ever more severe storms under climate change. The capacity to recharge our aquifers, which is probably the most important aspect of drought resiliency, also a major, and really a functioning economy, because it's only if we can figure out and unravel these ecological, it's a mess now, right? But if we can start to see that functioning river systems equal more fish, and more fish equal a more secure water supply, then you're getting at that fundamental economic issue as well. So there's a lot of potential on the floodplain.
All right, well, thank you very much, Jacob.